Hello Year 10 students, welcome back to the 4th edition of 12 Angry Men. We're doing summary and annotation, so have your sticky notes out, have your highlighters and your pens out so we can analyse as we go. And we're starting where we left off last lesson, which was after this secret ballot where Juror 8 has gambled for support. He said, if all of you vote guilty, I'll agree, I'll change my vote. But if anybody votes not guilty, we'll stay and talk this thing out. And there has been one vote for not guilty. And the jurors are kind of disgusted by this. Boy, how do you like it? Another chap flaps his goddamn wing. And Juror 10 insists on wanting to know who it was. And Juror 11 is the voice of a voice of defence and reason. He says, what? It's a secret ballot. We agreed on this. And Juror 3 then says, secret? What do you mean secret? There are no secrets. I know who it was. And he accuses the 5th juror, who we've learnt is the same background, the same slum background as the accused. And he accuses him of changing his vote. Some notes that I've written here, I've written that it's a sarcastic attack or an ad hominem attack, which is a personal attack. An ad hominem attack, it comes from Latin and it means like personal. So he attacks the 5th juror for changing his vote, and the 5th juror says, no, wait a minute, you can't talk to me like that. Where does he get the right to shout at me? And Juror 4 is trying to calm them down, and at the end of page 27, we see Juror 9, the one who says he didn't change his vote, I did. So the elderly gentleman is the one courageous enough to admit that he changed his vote. And he says, would you like me to tell you why? And he's about to go into that there. Just one more thing that I think is worth noting on this page. Here, Juror 11, and he says, I would like to say something here. I have always thought that in this country, a man was entitled to have unpopular opinions. Remember that the 11th juror, as a refugee from Europe, from Germany, he values the freedom of speech that he is able to have in America. And that saying that, I don't agree with your beliefs, but I'll fight to the death the right to express them. The freedom of speech is a value that is held very highly in Western society. And here Reginald Rose is extolling that, is praising that value through the voice of the 11th juror. Okay. And the 9th juror then comes and explains his motivations in changing his vote. He says, look, this gentleman has been standing alone against us. He doesn't say the boy is not guilty. He just isn't sure. Well, it's not easy to stand alone against the ridicule of others. He gambled for support and I gave it to him. So note that courage the theme of courage being demonstrated here. It's not easy to stand alone against the ridicule of others. And Juror 9 and Juror 8 both demonstrate those values of courage and standing up against perceived injustice or very real injustices. And I love this quote here. He tries to... So Juror 11 is speaking to the 7th juror. And he says, wait, I'm talking here. You have no right to... The 7th juror walks away. And the 8th juror says, he can't hear you. He never will. And so that idea of some people just, no matter how strongly you give your perspective, you give your views, they just will never, ever change. They're prejudiced. They've already got their minds made up. And if somebody can't hear you, is it even worth trying to blow hot air to actually change their minds? And so the foreman takes the evidence knife away, and the other knife that the juror 8 has brought is actually still in the jury room. Notice here that the washroom, I've got this note here, that the washroom is used and has escaped from the tension. So juror 8 leaves and he kind of slams, juror 7 leaves and he slams his door, the door as he leaves, and characters throughout will enter the washroom at times of tension, and it kind of breaks up the action of the play, but it also breaks up the tension in the room. And so juror 12, we learn that he works in an ad agency, so he works in advertising, and he says, I wish I knew how we could break this up. We got 10-2, and then down here we learn about the 11th juror, who is a watchmaker. He has a German accent. We assume that he's a refugee from the war, and that he has probably experienced or witnessed persecution and prejudice through the Second World War with Germany under the rule of the Nazi government and Hitler. And so the 12th juror, as he's kind of talking about the pretty strange people, the peculiar ways of expressing themselves, he says that in an ad agency, they get to this point in a meeting, and some character will say, they'll preface that or precede the idea with some sort of phrase like, here's an idea, let's run it up the flagpole and see if anyone salutes it, or let's put it on a bus and see if it gets off at Wall Street. And the interesting thing here is he makes this comment about what people might say before they give an idea, but he actually doesn't make the idea himself. And something I really want you to notice about the 12th juror, he works in an ad agency, and I think he's now hot air, and I wouldn't use the word hot air in your essays, but there's a lot of surface level comments that lack substance. So it's about how an idea is presented, not the idea itself. Because here, let's run it up the flagpole and see if anyone salutes it. Let's put it on a bus and see if it gets on at Wall Street. And he has another one later on as well. So just something to notice about the commentary that Reginald Rose is making about the commercial world, about the world of marketing and business and advertising in particular, through the 12th juror. And then the 8th juror moves into the washroom, again that release from the tension. And the 3rd juror attempts to apologise to the 5th juror. The 5th juror crosses away without answering, and we notice that body language that shows his disapproval. The 7th juror and 8th juror have a bit of a conversation here, and the 7th juror asks, are you a salesman? And we learn that the 8th juror is an architect. And you might think about the sort of qualities that are required to make somebody an architect. Meticulous, measured, lots of planning. Anyway, the 7th juror sells marmalade, made $27,000 last year. And I imagine back then that was quite a lot of money. And he talks about something called the soft sell, where you're trying to sell somebody on something, and he says, look, what's in it for you? The boy's guilty. And the 8th juror says, what's the difference whether you get one here, a sore throat? So he says, what's the difference whether you get a sore throat here or at the ball game? So the 8th juror again recognises the 7th juror's motivation for getting out quickly to get to the ball game. And then the 6th juror comes in, and the 6th and the 8th juror continue this conversation. They comment on the 3rd juror's embarrassing proclamation about his violent history with his son, and then we continue with the 6th juror asserting that he's guilty for sure. And the eighth juror says, well, I think it's possible he's not guilty. Well, I'm betting you've never been wronger in your life, says the sixth juror. And I think this section here, I put a big star here. I think it is really worth, and so we're on page 30. I think it's really worth noting and highlighting and annotating. And that is, look, so the sixth juror, who is a working man. We learn later that he's a house painter. He says, I'm not used to supposing. My boss does the supposing, but I'll try one. Suppose you talk us all out of this. And the kid really did knife his father. And these stage directions here. So the sixth juror looks for a minute and then walks out. The eighth juror stands alone for a few moments, and we know, the audience know, that this is the problem that has been tormenting him. He does not know and never will. So from these stage directions, you could definitely pick up some quotes. That idea that he's been tormented with the indecision of the not knowing if the boy's guilty or not, and whether it's the right thing to do to actually stand against them. And so, one, we know that the eighth juror is really thinking deeply about it. But through that, Reginald Rose is also prompting readers and the audience of the play to recognise the importance of thinking deeply about and considering things from lots of angles and measuring the different evidence, weighing up all the possibilities. That's the responsibility that we should take as we participate in the jury system and as we participate in democracy. And so, okay, so then the sixth juror continues and talks about his rationale because of the motive, that he's trying to find a motive for the killing. And he says, yes, the boy has a motive. And the motive being that he's been beaten by his father. And the eighth juror says, well, as far as I know, we're supposed to find that the job in a jury is whether the boy on trial is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. We're not trying to work out anyone else's motives. Okay? And the idea of reasonable doubt being a concept very important in the jury system. Later on, there's a great quote about that. And that's doubt with this valid logical reason to support it. You could doubt anything, so it's reasonable doubt. And the fourth juror then talks, and again, the voice of reason. He says, this gentleman is asking, reasonable question, the sixth juror. He says, somebody killed him, so if it wasn't the boy, who was it? Who else could have a motive? Then, we're on 31 here, so at the bottom of 31, the eighth juror looks at other possible people who could have a motive. Somebody served in prison with, by a bookmaker, thinking of the father's history as a gambler, as a criminal. And the 10th juror says, the biggest load of crap ever. And let's turn over to page 32. And then juror 3 is talking about the evidence of I'm going to kill you, and that the man downstairs, the old man downstairs hearing I'm going to kill you, and then hearing the body hit the floor, and then seeing the kid run out of the house. And the eighth juror brings up, well, how could he? Clearly had the boy's voice through the ceiling. I said, well, it wasn't through the ceiling, it was through the window upstairs, so out the window upstairs. But the voice came from another apartment because you really hear it that clearly. Apparently he identified it in court, but the old man would know the boy's voice because he had lived near him for years. Maybe it's possible he's wrong. And then the 12th juror brings up this second piece of evidence where the woman across the street actually saw the killing through the open window. And the 8th juror is still like, well, it's not enough for me. And and they talk about the fourth juror brings up this killing was through the windows of the elevated train and was through the last 2 cars of a 6-car train. And then still they're not sure. And I noticed this, and I highlighted this bit here at the top of 33, that the third juror is starting to draw, third juror and the 12th juror playing tic-tac-toe, which is noughts and crosses, indicating that they're bored, they're just playing a game, and they're not treating the boy's life seriously. They're treating it like it's a game, indicating their carelessness and callousness, perhaps. And the 8th juror sees the 2 jurors playing tic-tac-toe, snatches the pad, crumples it, shows his physical disapproval of that act, drops it in the wastebasket. He shouts, "It is not a game." No, he doesn't shout. Sorry, third juror shouts. The 8th juror just says, "It isn't a game." And then they move on to discussing how long it would take for a train to go past the window. Page 34. And they decide it takes maybe 10 seconds to pass any given point. And they were talking about what the sound is like living next to the L tracks. Remember L being an elevated train that's up on the 2nd story, or what we'd call in Australia the 1st floor. And they said it's really noisy. You can't even hear yourself think. And then the 8th juror tries to put these 2 pieces of testimony together. There's the old man in the apartment downstairs who hears the boy say, "I'm going to kill you," and a split second later hears the body hit the floor 1 second later. But the woman in the apartment across the street claims she looked out the window and saw the killing through the last 2 cars of a passing elevated train. And so basically, Juror 8 is getting at the fact that these 2 pieces of evidence put together, so the body would hit the floor just as the train passes by. So for a full 10 seconds before the body fell, this train roaring past. So the old man would have had to hear, "I'm going to kill you," and the body hit the floor as the L train was roaring past his nose, and it's not possible. So these 2 pieces of evidence really don't match up, they don't align. And the jurors respond to this. The 3rd juror says, "Oh, surely you could have heard it." And the old man said the boy yelled it out. "That's enough." And the 8th juror says, "Well, if you heard anything, he still couldn't have identified the voice through the L train roaring by." The 3rd juror says, "You're talking about a matter of seconds here. Nobody can be that accurate." And the 8th juror then says, "Well, I think testimony that should put a human being into the electric chair should be that accurate." And I think that's a really good quote to focus in on too, because it's really exploring Rose's views and values. It's Rose is saying that, if somebody's life's on the line, we need to be accurate with the evidence that we're presenting, and that idea that questioning evidence to make sure that it actually is legitimate and valid. And so then they go and debate, the jurors go on to debate why somebody would lie. So maybe he didn't hear it, why somebody would lie. And the 3rd juror attacks not physically, but verbally attacks the 9th juror, saying, "You keep coming up with these bright sayings. Why don't you send one into the newspaper? They pay $3. And the 6th juror defends the old man, the old juror, the 9th juror. It's like, "What are you talking to him like that for? A guy who talks to an old man like that ought to really get stepped on, And the 6th juror then says, "You ought to have some respect, mister. If you say stuff like that to him again, I'm going to lay you out." And then and he says, "Look, go on, you can say anything you like. Why do you think the old man might lie?" And this is another monologue that I really like, where the 9th juror explains why the old man might possibly lie. And he observed him for a long time. He has a jacket that his seam was split. He was a very old man with a torn jacket, and he walked very slowly to the stand. He was dragging his left leg and trying to hide it because he was ashamed. I think I know him better than anyone here. It's clear that he identifies with the old man. This is a quiet, frightened, insignificant old man who's been nothing all his life, who has never had recognition, his name in the newspapers. Nobody knows him. Nobody quotes him. Nobody seeks his advice after 75 years. It's a very sad thing to be nothing. A man like this needs to be recognized, to be listened to be quoted just once. This is very important. It would be so hard for him to recede into the background. And we know that the ninth juror is speaking because he himself, as an elderly man, recognizes this need. And so perhaps if you are analysing this, some things to notice that I noticed anyway is the anaphora, which is repetition at the start of a clause of nobody knows, nobody quotes, nobody seeks. And even again here, needs to be recognised, to be listened to be quoted. That's repetition there too. So the reason that the old gentleman, or the need to be recognised, the fact that witnesses may be mistaken or misled, and later on it's like he wouldn't really lie, he would just make himself believe that he's heard those words. And so we know that witnesses may have their minds tricked, and so the unreliability of eyewitness testimony here can be seen when a witness might want to feel important because they have a need to be recognised, to be listened to be quoted, because nobody knows him, quotes him, or seeks his advice, for example. So there are things that you could use and collect for any time you want to discuss the reliability or unreliability of eyewitness testimony. And the 11th juror here, and it has another really great quote that I think is also highlighting Rose's views and values, and that is that facts may be coloured by the personalities of the people who present them. So depending on the way we present those facts, we may actually twist them. And so Rose is really suggesting through the entire jury deliberation that we ought to question facts, check facts, test facts, and not just blindly accept what we're told, but place them next to each other and consider deeply the source of the facts and how they might be interpreted. So the testing of the facts. Interestingly, here we come up with the cough drop, and these cough drops and the juror 10's cold are a symbol that's repeated. And just remember that the juror 10 and his illness, metaphorically suggesting his sick attitude and ways of thinking as well. And so despite the unreliability of those two pieces of testimony put together, the other jurors, juror 12, saying, I still don't think it's possible. Whereas juror 8 then continues to talk about this piece of testimony, which is that the old man says he heard the boy say, I'm going to kill you. But then the juror 8 says, look, if he even did really hear it, this phrase, how many of us have ever used it? Hundreds. I could kill you for that, darling. If you do that one more time, Junior, I'm going to kill you. Like, we say it every day. It doesn't mean we're going to kill somebody, really. It's just an expression, basically. And juror 3, and this is really worth noting here, juror 3 says, wait a minute, what are you trying to give us here? The phrase was, I'm going to kill you, and the kid screamed it out at the top of his lungs. Don't tell me he didn't mean it. Anyone says a thing like that, the way he said it, they mean it. That's certainly worth noticing. it's a beautiful piece of foreshadowing by Rose, who later on is going to bring this back, and it's going to bite the third juror. Anyway, the second juror then goes in to say, well, I was arguing, and the third juror again, nope, this guy's making you believe things that aren't so. The kid said he was going to kill him, and he did kill him. And the eighth juror says, do you really think the boy would shout out a thing like that to the whole neighbourhood if he was really going to kill him? He's much too bright for that. I love this line here. Just let it sink in for a minute. Bright, he's a common ignorant slob. He don't even speak good English. Which, of course, is ironic because he's commenting on the English levels of the accused using incorrect grammar himself. Of course, it should be doesn't, not don't. And then the correction comes from the 11th juror, who is the immigrant, who's a non-native English speaker, who corrects the 10th juror and says he doesn't even speak good English. And at this point, the 5th juror speaks up and says, I'd like to change my vote to not guilty. And so the vote here is now 9-3. And we're going to stop right there and continue in the next video.